On the morning of May 29, 1453, the last Roman emperor stood on the walls of the greatest city in the world and watched an army of 80,000 men prepare to destroy everything he had left. His name was Constantine the 11th. His city was Constantinople. His empire, which had lasted nearly 1,500 years, was down to a few square miles of crumbling walls and empty fields. He had 7,000 soldiers against a force that outnumbered him more than 10 to 1. He had no reinforcements coming, no allies, no hope, and somewhere beyond those walls, a 21-year-old sultan was about to change the course of human history with a cannon so massive it took 90 oxen and 400 men to move it. By sunset, the Roman Empire would be gone, and the city that had been the center of the world for over 1,000 years would begin its transformation into something else entirely. This is the story of how Constantinople became Istanbul. And it is the story of the day the world changed forever. This is Professor Blackwell, the channel where empires are exposed and the real history of money and power is finally told. If you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit that button and ring the bell, because today we are telling a story so epic, so dramatic, and so consequential that historians still argue about it 6 centuries later. So pour yourself a coffee, close the other tabs, give me your full attention, because this is the fall of an empire, the rise of another, and the death and rebirth of the most strategic city on earth. To understand why Constantinople mattered so much, you have to understand where it sits. The city straddles the Bosphorus, the narrow strait that separates Europe from Asia. It is the only city on earth that belongs to 2 continents at the same time. Whoever controls Constantinople controls the only water passage between the Mediterranean Sea and the Black Sea. That means you control trade. You control military movement. You control the crossroads of civilizations. This is why every empire in history wanted it. The city began its life around 657 BC as a small Greek colony called Byzantium, founded by settlers from Megara. For nearly 1,000 years, it was a modest trading town, strategically located but not particularly powerful. That changed forever in 330 AD, when the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great chose this spot as the site for a new capital. He rebuilt the city from the ground up, filled it with monuments, churches, libraries, and palaces, and named it after himself, Constantinople, the New Rome. And for the next 11 centuries, Constantinople was arguably the most important city in the world. While the Western Roman Empire crumbled and fell in 476 AD, the eastern half survived. We call it the Byzantine Empire, but its people never used that name. They called themselves Romans, and Constantinople was their eternal city. At its peak under Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, the city had a population of roughly 400,000 people, making it the largest city in Europe by a massive margin. While London and Paris were little more than muddy villages, Constantinople had running water, public baths, hospitals, universities, and the greatest cathedral in Christendom, the Hagia Sophia. Built in just 5 years, the Hagia Sophia's dome was an engineering marvel that would not be surpassed for nearly 1,000 years. But the true secret of Constantinople's survival was its walls. The Theodosian Walls, built in the 5th century, were the most formidable fortifications in the medieval world. A triple layer of walls, towers, and moats stretching for 20 kilometers around the city. For over 800 years, army after army threw itself against those walls and failed. The Goths failed, the Persians failed. The Arabs tried twice, once between 674 and 678, and again between 717 and 718, and failed both times. The Bulgarians failed, the Russians failed. The walls were considered impregnable, Constantinople could not be taken by force until it was, and the first time it fell. The attackers were not Muslims, they were Christians. In 1204, the knights of the Fourth Crusade, who were supposed to be on their way to reclaim the Holy Land, instead sacked Constantinople. They looted its churches, melted down its treasures, and carved the Byzantine Empire into pieces. It was one of the most shameful betrayals in Christian history, and it wounded Constantinople so deeply that the city never fully recovered. When the Byzantines reclaimed their capital in 1261, what they got back was a shadow of what had been lost. The population had collapsed. The treasury was empty. The empire was surrounded by enemies. By the early 1400s, the Byzantine Empire was barely an empire at all. It had been reduced to Constantinople itself, and a few scattered territories in Greece. The Ottoman Turks, who had been rising since the late 1200s, controlled virtually all of the former Byzantine lands in both Europe and Asia. Constantinople was an island in an Ottoman sea. The city that had once commanded an empire stretching from Spain to Syria was now just a walled enclave, a relic of a vanished age, waiting for the final blow. That blow came from a young man named Mehmed. He became Sultan for the second time in 1451 at the age of 19. And from the moment he took the throne, he had one obsession: Constantinople. He did not care about anything else. He studied the city's defenses obsessively. He drew sketches of the walls at night. He planned cannon placements. He calculated troop movements. His own advisors thought the siege was too risky. His Grand Vizier urged caution. But Mehmed was not interested in caution. He was interested in history, and he intended to be the man who finally took the city that no one had been able to conquer. His first move was strategic. In 1452, he built a massive fortress called Rumela Hisari on the European shore of the Bosphorus, at its narrowest point. This fortress, constructed in just 4 months, gave the Ottomans complete control over the strait. No ships could pass without Ottoman permission. Constantinople was now cut off from any naval resupply from the Black Sea. His second move was technological. He hired a Hungarian cannon maker named Urban, an engineer who had originally offered his services to the Byzantines. Emperor Constantine the 11th could not afford him. Mehmed could. He asked Urban if he could build a cannon powerful enough to break through the walls of Constantinople. Urban reportedly replied that he could build a cannon that would shatter the walls of Babylon itself. The cannon he delivered was a monster, 9 meters long, a mouth 1 meter wide, capable of firing a stone ball weighing 500 kilograms over a distance of 1.5 kilometers. It took so long to load and cool that it could only fire 7 times a day. But it did not need to fire often. Each shot was devastating. By early April 1453, everything was in place. Mehmed arrived at the walls of Constantinople with an army estimated at 60,000 to 80,000 men. He brought a navy of over 300 ships. He brought 69 cannons. And he brought the absolute determination of a young ruler who believed that taking this city was his destiny. Inside the walls, Emperor Constantine the 11th had roughly 7,000 defenders, about 5,000 Greeks, and fewer than 2,000 foreigners, mostly Genoese and Venetian volunteers. His second in command was a Genoese soldier named Giovanni Giustiniani, an expert in siege warfare who had arrived with 700 men. Constantine begged the Christian powers of Europe for help. Hungary refused. The Pope saw the crisis as leverage to push for the reunification of the Catholic and Orthodox churches. Venice sent 2 ships and 800 men, far too little and far too late. Constantinople was essentially on its own. On April 2nd, the gates of the city were closed, and a massive iron chain was stretched across the Golden Horn. the city's famous natural harbor, to prevent Ottoman ships from entering. On April 6, the bombardment began. The great cannon and dozens of smaller ones opened fire on the Theodosian Walls. The walls that had stood for 1,000 years began to crack, crumble, and collapse under a bombardment the world had never seen before. This was the moment that medieval warfare ended and modern warfare began. Gunpowder had changed everything. For 53 days, the siege raged. The Ottomans attacked by land and sea. They tried to tunnel under the walls. They even performed one of the most audacious military maneuvers in history, dragging 70 ships overland on greased logs to bypass the chain blocking the Golden Horn. Imagine that scene. Thousands of men hauling warships across a hill in the middle of the night, lowering them into the harbor behind the Byzantine defenses. It was an act of sheer will and logistical genius. The defenders fought with extraordinary courage. Every night, they repaired the breaches in the walls that the cannons had created during the day. Giustiniani organized the defense brilliantly, using the outer walls as a forward position, while archers and gunmen fired from the higher inner walls. But the numbers were simply too overwhelming. The defenders could not be everywhere at once, and the walls were 20 kilometers long. On the night of May 28, Mehmed addressed his troops. He promised them 3 days of looting if they took the city. In the early hours of May 29, 1453, the final assault began. Wave after wave of Ottoman soldiers attacked the walls. The first wave was the irregulars, expendable troops sent to tire the defenders. The second wave was the Anatolian regulars, better trained and better equipped. And then came the third wave, the Janissaries, the elite, the best soldiers in the Ottoman army. During the fighting, Giustiniani was wounded by a crossbow bolt or a bullet. He asked to be carried off the walls. When the defenders saw their commander being taken away, panic spread. A gate was left open. Ottoman soldiers poured through, and at roughly the same time, a small group of Turks discovered that a small postern gate called the Kirkaporta had been left unlocked. They flooded in. Emperor Constantine the 11th saw that the city was lost. According to the accounts that survived, he removed his imperial regalia, drew his sword, and threw himself into the final battle on foot. His body was never conclusively identified. The last Roman emperor died as a soldier, fighting hand to hand for a city that had carried the legacy of Rome for over 1,000 years. By the afternoon, it was over. Constantinople had fallen. The city that had resisted every army for 11 centuries had finally been taken. And the man who took it was 21 years old. Mehmed entered the city and rode directly to the Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in Christendom. He ordered it converted into a mosque. He declared Constantinople the new capital of the Ottoman Empire, and he gave himself a new title, Mehmed the Conqueror, the Fatih. But here is the part that surprises most people. Mehmed did not destroy Constantinople. After 3 days of looting, which was customary under the laws of warfare at the time, he ordered all pillaging to stop. He then began rebuilding. He repopulated the city by bringing in Muslims, Christians, and Jews from across the empire. He restored infrastructure. He built mosques, markets, baths, and schools. He wanted Constantinople to be great again, just under a different flag. And the name? This is where the story takes its final, fascinating turn. Contrary to popular belief, the Ottomans did not immediately rename the city Istanbul. They called it Constantini, an Arabic adaptation of Constantinople. The name Istanbul actually comes from the Greek phrase "Ais tin Polin," meaning to the city. Greek residents of Constantinople had been using this shorthand for centuries. When you asked someone where they were going, the answer was simply to the city. Is tin Polin. Over time, In Turkish mouths, this became Istanpolin, then Stanbulin, and eventually Istanbul. The name came not from the conquerors, but from the very people they conquered. For nearly 500 years, both names existed side by side. The Ottomans used Constantini in official documents, on coins, and in court records. But in everyday speech, the city was increasingly called Istanbul. The Ottoman Empire itself grew into one of the most powerful states in the world, stretching from Hungary to Yemen, from Algeria to Iraq. Constantinople, now the Ottoman capital, became a cosmopolitan metropolis once again. Under Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent in the 16th century, the city was adorned with some of the most beautiful architecture in Islamic history, including the Suleimani Mosque, designed by the legendary architect Mehmed. Christians, Muslims, and Jews lived side by side in a city that was once again the center of the world. But empires rise and empires fall. By the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire was the sick man of Europe, weakened by wars, corruption, and the relentless pressure of modernization. World War I delivered the final blow. The Ottoman Sultanate was abolished in 1922, and the Republic of Turkey was born in 1923 under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. The capital was moved from Constantinople to Ankara as part of Ataturk's program to build a new, secular, modern state. It was not until 1930, 7 years after the Republic was established, that the Turkish Postal Service officially made Istanbul the only name of the city. Western governments gradually accepted the change, though Constantinople continued to appear on maps well into the 1960s. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 was not just the end of the Byzantine Empire. Historians regard it as the end of the Middle Ages itself. The shockwave it sent through Europe had consequences that shaped the modern world in ways that are still visible today. First, there was the intellectual exodus. Greek scholars fleeing Constantinople brought with them ancient manuscripts, philosophical texts, and scientific knowledge that had been preserved in Byzantine libraries for centuries. Works by Aristotle, Plato, Euclid, and Ptolemy that had been lost to Western Europe suddenly reappeared in the hands of Italian scholars. This flood of classical knowledge into Italy helped ignite the Renaissance, one of the greatest intellectual awakenings in human history. Without the fall of Constantinople, the Renaissance as we know it might never have happened, or at least would have looked very different. Second, there was the economic disruption. European merchants, particularly the Venetians and Genoese, who had relied on Constantinople as a trade hub, suddenly lost their most important gateway to the east. The silk and spice routes that had connected Europe to China and India for centuries were now under Ottoman control. European nations, desperate to find alternative routes, began searching for sea passages to Asia. The Portuguese sailed around Africa. The Spanish sailed west. Columbus reached the Americas in 1492, just 39 years after Constantinople fell. The Age of Exploration, which redrew the map of the entire world, was a direct consequence of the fall of one city. Third, there was the military revolution. The siege of Constantinople proved that gunpowder artillery could defeat even the strongest medieval fortifications. Every castle builder and military commander in Europe took notice. Within decades, the design of European fortifications changed completely, and the era of knights and walled castles gave way to the era of cannons and standing armies. Modern warfare was born in the rubble of the Theodosian Walls, and so the fall of one city helped give birth to the modern world. A 21-year-old sultan, a cannon that changed warfare. 7,000 defenders against 80,000 attackers. A last emperor who died with a sword in his hand, and a city that has been called Byzantium, Constantinople, Constantini, Istanbul, and Istanbul, across 2,600 years of continuous human civilization. 5 names, 1 city, and a story that echoes through every century since. Today, Istanbul is the largest city in Europe by population, home to over 15 million people. The Hagia Sophia still stands, converted back into a mosque in 2020 after decades as a museum, a decision that reignited centuries-old debates about identity, religion, and ownership. The Theodosian Walls still stand, scarred by cannon fire that is over 500 years old, and the Bosphorus still flows between 2 continents, just as it did on that Tuesday morning in May 1453, when the world changed forever. And there is one small detail that captures the weight of that day better than any statistic. May 29, 1453, fell on a Tuesday. And to this day, across Greece and among Greek communities around the world, Tuesday is considered an unlucky day, not because of superstition, but because of memory. The memory of the day the city fell. The memory of the last emperor. The memory of a world that ended on a Tuesday morning 6 centuries ago and left a wound that has never fully healed. For Greeks, the city is still Constantinople. They still call it Ipoli, the city, as if there is only one city in the world worth naming. And in a way, they are right. There is only one city that has been the capital of 3 empires, the crossroads of 2 continents, and the hinge on which the medieval world turned into the modern one. And now you have heard the full story. From a Greek colony to a Roman capital, from the crown jewel of Christendom to the seat of an Islamic empire, from Constantinople to Istanbul, a city that has been conquered, renamed, rebuilt, and reinvented more times than almost any place on earth. And through it all, it has never stopped being the most important crossroads on the planet. A city where East meets West, where history meets the present, and where the echoes of 1453 still reverberate through the streets, the mosques, and the memories of millions.